So we are going to slide right into coulda, shoulda, woulda. We all know that sometimes the best way to learn is to hear from what others have learned. And you've heard that, those kinds of things. We learn by experience. We learn by tactile, by listening, by doing. And so this panel, each one of them is going to go through some experiences that they have, things that they are seeing that could really help you. This is informal. Justin is going to show something on the screen, but otherwise they're going to talk about their experiences, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So all kinds of things that you want to ask. So we have Justin Shoemaker. Justin, thank you for doing what I think is now triple duty at this point. Welcome to the club. Also, Kelly Martin, you're in double duty right now. And Kelly, again, is the Region 1 Construction Project Manager. Justin is a Region 3 Transportation Project Manager. And joining us also is Chris Bucher. Okay. He is the State Contract Administration Engineer. So I'm glad to have him here as well. So take it away, panel.
Are you going to take these away from us? Oh, we're keeping them now. Okay. Hey, guys. So a little bit about me, I guess, is I have 12 plus years on the local agency side out of Region 1. Recently moved down to Region 3, and I'm doing both local agency and state projects. So I can be asked a gauntlet of projects or questions on projects. I used to get a lot of the weird ones that came out of the state, which I delivered a lot of CMAQ projects, worked with DEQ. So I bought trucks, buses, the electrification of I-5, the CNG fueling stations. So there's a whole bunch of weird projects that I've kind of put through our system.
I'm Kelly Martin. I've been in Region 1 in project delivery for about 5.5 years now. I'm the senior project leader. I have 25 years of government experience. I spent a lot of time doing data and then moved into the project delivery realm. I deliver large projects. So right now I'm working on a $135 million modernization project in the Beaverton-Tigard area on 217.
Good morning, Chris Bucher. As she mentioned, I've only been with ODOT for about 5 months now. Before that, I was with Federal Highway for 10 years here in Oregon. And then prior to that, worked for consultant for a few years, as well as the Indiana DOT for several years. And yeah, I've been here in Oregon for about 10 years, initially to come work for Federal Highway, and it took me 10 years to finally see the light and come to the winning side. So it's good to be here.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that were already given to us. I will read the question, the couple that I'm going to answer. Justin has a few, and then we want to push it out to you guys. If you have questions you want to ask, we are here to answer them. I'm going to kind of combine these first two together. It says ODOT does not require a project management plan unless project is expected to not follow the normal process. Do you believe a PMP is a good idea to develop and update throughout the project life cycle? And then it talks about, the second question asks why we don't talk about earned value, man hours, collaboration, soft skills, value of information, tacit knowledge, and the work breakdown structure. The reason I'm grouping these two together is that both of these kind of are leaning towards the question of why aren't we following PMI's expectations of a project. And when I first came into project management, I would say we really didn't follow PMI at all. I feel that with the development of the new unit in Salem, who is helping, the project delivery office is helping to move us more towards PMI's way of doing business. This question asking specifically about the project management plan, I believe that our new project charters really cover a lot of what is in the project management plan, but maybe not exactly. But as I'm studying to take the PMP in a couple weeks, I will tell you that there are so many different forms out there that you could use, and we do not have time to do every single one of them on our projects. If you do have time and you feel it's useful, use it. And there are some of these tools available that we do use, but it's really specific to what project. If you have a really small project that doesn't have a lot of risk and it's going to be quick and easy, I don't think I've seen one of those, but if you have one, then you may have time, but do you really need to go through the process of doing a full work breakdown structure on a very simple project? When you have a very large project, I think that using a work breakdown structure is a great tool and really helps to bring the team in so that they are in a full agreement of what is going to happen on this project. Unfortunately, a lot of times a project doesn't start out as a really large project, it just becomes a very large project. Over the last 4 years, I have had 2 really big projects that started as really pretty small, minor projects that ended up morphing into really large projects. So we're working through how to follow PMI recommendations. If you have experience with them and want to help the other people in your area or in your region learn how to use those tools, I think it's great to help share that information. But are we going to require those on every project? I don't think that we have time to require multiple more tools be used on every project. They need to be specific to the project and what's going to be useful for you. And my next question is, all resources specifically ask for earlier engagement. Obviously, we have to worry about budget, and we can find balance with this. Should we also consider lengthening our schedule up front before DAP to allow for this? First of all, with the new DAP process, yes, lengthen your DAP process. It is really important to make sure that you are allowing enough time in your schedules. And when I first started working on projects, I didn't fully understand what I was getting into, and I was told, oh, you can compress this, oh, you can compress this. The teams were yelling at me. I didn't understand why they were getting so upset with me until we got further into the process and I realized, oh, I probably shouldn't have compressed it quite so far. We really need to give them time to do their job and do what they need to do. So yes, if you can, and it starts with even at scoping, making sure that you're saying, hey, we need to have enough time to look at all of these different aspects of the project. We need to leave enough time to truly do DAP and get to where we can answer all of the questions. As far as worrying about the budget when you're bringing people in early, from my experience, bringing them in early saves you money. I know that it looks like, well, they're going to be charging to my project longer, or I'm going to charge more hours to my project, but they're going to save you from headaches in the end where you're scrambling to try to figure out a way to fix a problem that didn't have to be a problem in the first place.
Any questions to that? Silence, I like it.
Let me jump in on that a little bit as it relates to construction then. How many of you have heard the phrase differing site conditions? Okay. How many of you have heard the phrase agency caused delay? Okay. Maybe you haven't heard of this concept, but we have superior knowledge. We have 3 years or so to put time and effort and energy and money into designing a project. The contractor loves to say when he gets in a conflicting situation, they had 3 years, I only had 3 weeks to bid this project. So we need to do everything we can, even if it means lengthening the schedule a little bit. We need to do everything we can to make sure that we have done everything possible to make these plans as clear, as omission-free as we can, do our due diligence, because what you do matters greatly as how it plays out in the construction field, okay?
All right, so I have a softball question here. It says the process of starting the procurement for A&E contract and how to reduce the time it takes. Well, the easiest way to start it is you go onto the website and you go to the OPO page and you click on it and say, hey, I need an A&E contract. You can actually reach out to these guys even before you have your EAs set up, and you can do kind of a scoping level effort with them and work on getting your RFP, they'll start showing you where your statement of work is at, and get all your documents in a row. So for me, on the consultant side for local agencies, there was a lot of times where we were working on all of these projects, or the project documentation before we even had the IGA. In Region 1, we work with a PIN. I'm not sure if that's with the rest of you guys can actually use a PIN to use your charge account, or you're gonna have to use your IN if you're gonna do something like that. That is the only way that we were actually able to drastically reduce the time, is just having all those documents in place and already ready to go. If you can give a statement of work that's pretty clean using the templates, and I know that there's a new template being worked on right now, if you can actually use that template, it helps a lot. So that's the only quickest way that you can get through the system. Another one is the negotiations. I know there's a couple of classes out there to do the negotiations class. Consultants are very busy right now, and you're going to get a lot of projects that are one, maybe two consultants even coming and making presentations for your contract. So you're going to have to try to negotiate those hours down.
Just another example that you can go about with your internal estimate is when you're working with the statement of work with your consultant, you can ask for a blank BOC, which it has the rates and the work breakdown, to compile your estimate before asking for their complete BOC. So that way you're talking apples to apples. That helps. I know you'll still be working on the statement of work and some of the items may change, but that kind of gives you a good base for your internal estimate. Blank copy with rates.
I guess I have one other thing from doing a lot of weird mod projects, and I also ran most of the large bridge projects out of Region 1, so any of the Multnomah County bridge projects were also mine. A lot of times, we don't use the planning phase enough. I think ODOT should use the planning phase a little bit more, because you can actually get to your 30% design and get a baseline and get real engineering estimates out of that. It gives you a little bit more time, especially if you're looking at alternative analysis in different places. Region 1 really likes to put their multi-use paths out there, but nobody knows where they can go. So it's a great way to actually go out and have those analyzed to see what's going to be cheaper, because there are a lot of issues when you are putting out new surfaces out there with federal aid dollars. I have one other question. So this one has to do with bundling of multiple projects, particularly when it has to do with arts, and what is the best way to go about in bundling them. Truthfully, this comes down to a regional decision. I know that in Region 1 we had a major, it was like 200 projects at one point. They were all $10,000 to $25,000 little micro projects, and then trying to combine them ended up being a bigger hassle than actually going through and choosing the projects. A lot of it could be in-house, or, that's one of the things you're gonna have to decide if it's gonna be an in-house or an outsourced type project. If they're multi-jurisdiction, you have to make sure you know that you're gonna be doing IGAs with multiple jurisdictions. Those end up being very hard if you're trying to do one IGA with 8 different jurisdictions on it. So a lot of times you may actually have to have an IGA with each jurisdiction. And then there was also with arts, there was a funding component to it, and that was ended up being a lot of arguments back and forth between the agencies. You can always just combine them by area or by jobs so that it's easier to actually consult them out. Does anybody have any questions on that one? That one's more of I think, really specific. Probably somebody from Region 1. All right, that's all the questions that I have.
That's all the questions we've gotten so far, so.
Didn't get a card turned in on this, but Justin, you and I have talked about this on some things. Could you maybe just address for folks the proper and improper use of other phases on projects and what you can accomplish and what you're not supposed to do?
Okay. So other phases are mostly used for early acquisitions, small projects to do before and after your project, clearing trees. We're starting to attempt to put the other phase and come in so we can actually close construction projects out by doing maintenance projects for the landscaping so that we can actually close our projects out early. You can use the other phase for ITS, so you'll have to do your systems analysis in the other phase. You can actually purchase software through the other phase. You can't just put money in there to buy things ahead of time or where you believe that you're going to switch types of money or colors of money from state to federal because it's in the other phase. So your first, I guess the first thing, if you have something that's kind of out of the norm, is ask your FHWA operations rep and a STIP coordinator. I heard that one too. But sometimes the STIP coordinators may have some questions too, so. But it's not a catch-all. That's one of the biggest things, is you can't just start loading other just to load the other phase.
Other questions for either Justin or Kelly? Okay.
All right, I guess a quick one. So woulda, shoulda, coulda. When you inherit a project from someone else, what are some woulda, shoulda, coulda when you start maybe in the middle inheriting a project?
I hate inheriting projects. If you have to hand a project over, be nice to the person you're handing it to and actually be available to answer questions, at least for a while. I know sometimes people are leaving, and that's usually how I ended up inheriting projects, was somebody left, and they're like, oh, you'll figure it out. It's well documented. No, it's not. It's not. So if you hear inkling that somebody might be leaving and you might be getting their project, go over and have a conversation with them. Sit down and say, tell me about your project. And then when you first get the project, go and talk to your lead designers and say, what do you think is really going on? Because I was handed a project, the project manager told me, this is everything you need to know, and I started talking to the lead designers when they left, and everything I learned about that project was nothing close to what I had been told by the previous project manager. So your lead designers are really going to be able to help you out, and don't be afraid to ask questions. You are not expected to know everything when you walk into that position. So go and talk to your lead designers and say, hey, where are you at? What are you doing on this project? Does that answer your question, Robert? Okay.
I really enjoy lessons learnt because I think as project managers, it gives us an opportunity to see into other people's projects. For example, like in this room, there's probably over 1,000 years worth of project management experience. Within ODOT, is there a place where we can access lessons learned?
David, do we have anything for Region 1? We do have some presentations that have been done, particularly on some of our large bridge projects. Like Multnomah County went through with Selwood. There's a presentation that if somebody wanted it, we could chase it down. I don't know if the Morrison Bridge, because that one ended up in a massive lawsuit. I don't know if that one's sitting around, and then Broadway Bridge, when we replaced the raw wheels, there are some of those presentations floating around. But David, I have to ask about more of the generalization of putting them in one place.
Yeah, currently there is no repository or place for lessons learned. As we're about to launch this quality management initiative, that's an arena where we're going to have a lessons learned component that can feed back into quality, but also a mechanism to be able to share. Most often it's going to be the peer groups where you have a PDQ or a conference where we can have individuals share lessons learned, best practices. If there's a significant lessons learned, then certainly we want to get something out. And I'll just say that several years ago, there's a pretty substantive lessons learned on a rumble strip project that I had as an area manager where we had major challenges, and I got a memo together and got that out to all the project leaders saying, if you have a rumble strip project, here's some things to consider. Just to your point about lessons learned, other things that we've done in the past to help get project teams up to speed is if you're working a corridor and you have multiple projects, a paving project or an interchange project. So example, up in Portland, Highway 26, we had a widening project, and it was a 2-mile widening project. And in the next step cycle, there was another 2-mile widening project. And what we did is we brought the construction office that worked on that last project to do that handoff to this new team, brought in designers because we had different project managers, different designers, and did that knowledge transfer. We also looked at all the contract change orders and said, are there any contract change orders from the last project that could potentially apply into the design of the next project? And some of the, just that transition of knowledge was very helpful. Another example was we had Region 5 work on a project in Region 1 for a brand new interchange. We had another interchange project in the same quarter, brought that team in, and they did that knowledge transfer. So there's a lot of best practices out there, and as we look to improve quality and continuous improvement, we're going to look at ways of better disseminating information out to the TPMs and the designers.
So another thing I'd recommend is you, as you're sitting through this presentation, you're seeing names of people who've been around for a while. Don't be afraid to call us. If you have a project that you are like, what are some lessons learned that I need to know? I know that in Region 1, I'll stand up and I'll ask, and we throw out questions, and whoever's had a project that has that apply to it, they'll share the information because you remember what you've been through. And sometimes until you're in the middle of it, they'll try to share it with you when they go through it, and you don't want to know until you're all of a sudden in it, and then it suddenly matters. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask.
Are the resident engineers still doing post-construction project narratives? Has anybody been invited to one of those meetings after a project? That's not happening anymore?
They're doing the narratives, but they haven't been having meetings, and I don't know exactly why.
Okay.
But I have seen the narrative, and I have to request the narrative. They don't just always get sent to me, and sometimes they're sent to our tech center managers.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Okay. Because that's something I'm definitely going to try and push again on the construction side, is taking time to put those narratives together, and then sharing those with the development side and encouraging everyone to really put time and effort. I know everybody wants to move past a project. Once it's done, we want to put it in a rearview mirror. We're busy. We've got a lot of things moving forward. But I really agree that the lessons learned is a huge opportunity. We have new people coming and going in different positions, And those are the opportunities for really collaborating, getting together, and talking through how the issues on the design side impacted the actual construction. So that's something definitely I want to see moving forward is both sides collaborating over the lessons learned through that narrative.
Chris, I have a question kind of along those lines. Melissa Sukowski talked to us a little bit about her review process, QA during PS&E, and some of the things that she sees, which some of them kind of fall in the drafting line. And when I consult with my construction project manager, he'll say, well, the plans are still biddable and buildable. And he didn't have concerns about many of them. But on the other hand, I hear rumors of horror stories about seemingly minor things that are in construction plans that result in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of change orders during construction. And I wouldn't hear about those if they happened anywhere, if they weren't in my regions. So could you give us some examples of the orders of magnitude that you're seeing on the construction end?
Yes, definitely. And you hit on something that I wanted to just mention at some point as well is, we have the project narratives that apparently aren't happening, but I want to see start again on the back side of projects. But then on the front end, I'd really love to see as early as possible, these projects being handed over for a constructability review to the resident engineer offices. I know it doesn't always work out perfectly with schedules and time demands and all of that, but and sometimes they don't even have the personnel to do it, but at least give them the opportunity to do that. And then you can wipe your hands clean and say, well, you had your chance. When something works out poorly in the field, at least you have that on your side. But I don't know that that's happening on every project, and there's some great experience in those resident engineer offices that if they had the time and the opportunity, they could potentially really point out some of those minor things as well as some of the major things to avoid the problems that sometimes result in the field, in construction. So I do have a few examples of how design-related things have impacted construction. I don't know how much time we have, and I don't know how many other questions we have. But I could easily take the rest of the time. But so I'll just start with one example, and we'll see where we go here. But and no project names, no individuals. The guilty will remain unnamed. But recent project where new alignment, which we don't do too many of those projects anymore, where we're breaking virgin ground, and if we do one of those, I encourage you to go out in the field and just smell what dirt smells like when it's freshly turned. It's I don't know, that's the construction in me. Sorry about that. But anyway, very undulating existing ground surface. We had bedrock at varying levels. Had borings for this project. And unfortunately, there was, on the plans, there was subgrade stabilization in areas where it probably shouldn't have been called out. The bedrock, the new ground surface was going to be getting into the bedrock, so there wasn't going to really be a need for subgrade stabilization. So anyway, contractors are great at finding little things and using them to their example, and I don't mean to point out that every contractor is evil, but it's competitive, and sometimes they got to price things pretty close. So they're looking for things to give them a little bit of an edge. But they had to do some significant rock blasting that they said they weren't anticipating because they saw the plans said there was subgrade stabilization. So that resulted in about $1 million+ in claims that we ended up settling for about $500,000. And we normally could have probably worked with that because we did have the boring logs. They could have consulted that. But unfortunately, as we started requesting email exchanges and things, we did find that one ODOT subject matter expert raised the concern about having subgrade stabilization in an area where there was going to be bedrock. And, you know, things happen, time constraints, but the engineer record stated, and I quote, "At this late stage in the bidding process, we will let plans and quantities remain as they are today and deal with this during construction." So that kind of hung us a little bit. If that would have come to light in a litigation situation, we would not have had much leverage there. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many have either said or heard, well, they can just work it out in construction? Okay, don't say it. Don't do it. It makes it hard. So that's, again, what I was getting to earlier is do what you can ahead of time because it's really hard to work it out in construction. And the resident engineers are really good at working through situations, but sometimes, and especially savvy contractors can really take advantage of little things and use them to their advantage. One more example, a large culvert replacement that had tieback soldier pile walls at all of the outflow and inflow locations. Our geotechnical design manual in that situation called for 16 borings. We only did 4 for some reason. I don't know the whole situation, but that turned out to be the phrase I used earlier, differing site condition opportunity for the contractor. And there were a whole lot of other issues on this project, but ultimately that led to a claim of about $830,000 that we ended up negotiating that down to about $350,000. But again, we need to do our due diligence, make sure that we're getting all the information that we can, so that we don't, so it doesn't result in that type of a situation. Any questions on those? I'll give you one more then. This seems like it's popping up more, but and especially in an urban situation where we're designing with our ADA ramps, sidewalks, existing man-made structures, and we're having to call out removal of these items, concrete sidewalks and curbs and ramps. And the question has come up, how are we being consistent with how we call out the removal of those items? Are they part of general excavation and incidental, or do we have specialty bid items that call those specific things out? And I think we're seeing it's fairly inconsistent amongst our project leaders, our design staff, as to how we're calling those out. And again, each situation, it might make sense to the individual, but when a contractor does it one way in one region on one job, and then they go to another job in another region, and we've called it out in a different way, that's an opportunity for them to manipulate or find a way to protest the way that it was called out. And so I think there's a little bit of a discussion starting amongst, at least in one region, about how to be more consistent so that we can make it clear to our contracting community what we expect in those situations. Those were the examples that I had. Any questions on those? Eli?
We had a couple in the queue.
Oh, sorry.
So some of your examples, not having enough bore logs in a project, not necessarily a transportation project manager or a PL will have that knowledge, right? So what recommendations would you have for them to maybe tease that out of a designer? And this maybe, goes back to David's thing is, this might be another reason why it would be important to have a statewide lessons learned log somewhere that all transportation project leaders can go through and at a high level say, oh, maybe I should talk to the designer about this issue, or at least give it to my design team to look at before we submit this to the next phase, whether it's DAP or PS&E.
Yeah, I don't know how all the communication happens on the project development side for that situation, but definitely if we had a lessons learned, this would be one of the ones we'd put in there for sure, yeah.
I think that what is being pointed to here is a disconnect between the design and the construction. Clearly, in a learning organization, there's a need for feedback. And the way things are presently set up, that feedback is not happening. So we can't learn as readily as we ought to from construction. And that is the actual test of design. And I think it's great to hear that we're getting better in that way. And whatever we can do to facilitate the learning on the design side from construction, whether it be from contractors, external to ODOT, or to resident engineers, internal, the better. And especially with change conditions claims and the fact that there's always a disconnect between geotech and bridge, which is historical, and not just at ODOT, but it's it goes back to our indoctrination in college. So everybody ought to be aware of that disconnect and make sure that the geotechnical aspects are being taken into consideration on every project. It's just straight across the board an issue, and it has to do with feedback. So this is a great opportunity. I appreciate you guys' efforts to provide some feedback here and address some feedback. And I think that's what is required for learning. So I think the more we do that, the better off we'll be. Especially if we're looking at final construction costs versus engineers' estimates. Now, why on earth are we not comparing those and finding analogous projects, analogous estimates? That should be intrinsic to the design process. I'm not sure if it is yet or not, but maybe it is in discrete areas, but it doesn't necessarily need to be formalized. But I think analogous projects are extremely helpful, and I think this is a helpful form to bring those things to light. So I appreciate it.
Thanks. Do you have something else?
I've got a question for Chris. What should we expect as TPMs on consultant and SFLP type projects for RAS efforts on our projects?
These are certified local agency or?
No.
Okay. Okay. What is SFLP? Okay. They should be on the same schedule as a regular STIP project. They should be getting there on their 3-month intervals. And that's the goal. So if we're not, then please let us know.
Are there differing expectations for SFLP type projects with our local agencies versus a full consultant project that is ODOT, a federally funded ODOT delivered project?
You're not going to have a RAS for the SFLP.
Yeah, no, for the SFLP, there won't be the same RAS oversight, no.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to say too, related to the just the having a better connection between construction and development. When we're in construction projects, it's very helpful when there's a question that comes or a need that comes from construction to the engineer record or someone on the development side. And I get it, everybody's busy. but as quickly and timely as you can respond on that, that helps tremendously, because again, the more there's a delay in the communication, that just is more leverage potentially for the contractor in negotiating later on with time and related to how that plays out on the project construction timeline. So I would encourage you to be as quick and responsive on questions as you can be.
I think those usually go directly to the engineer, not to us.
Okay, all right. So if they're needing to tap into your expertise in some way, I mean, sometimes it's multiple people that need to weigh in. So the more people, the longer it takes. So just in general, try and improve the communication feedback on that. And I'm not sure if this is even possible, if anyone has even looked into this. I'm new enough and naive enough to think that it might be an opportunity, but this is boot camp. How many of you have a pair of construction boots? Okay. How many of you have spent time in the field on a construction project for longer than a day? Oh, that's great. That's great. Because I think, with our, I want to encourage that in the agency, rotational opportunities that come up. Our RE offices are constantly looking for people. They're borrowing bodies from maintenance. We're hiring consultants. And I think every person involved in design, if they spent 6 months in the field on a construction project, I think that would greatly benefit the agency and them personally as a designer to see what actually goes on out there. There might be a few boring days, but in general, when you see how your designs practically impact, and even just the little things with little survey busts and things, and how that can potentially add a week to a project with just one little thing that's missed in a survey or something that's missed on the design from the survey, that can have a major impact. So anyway, if that triggers something inside you, tell them some guy at boot camp told you that you should go out in the field when you're requesting that in a future time frame, okay?
So on every one of my projects that I have completed, I've called up the resident engineer and said, hey, I want to come spend a day with you out there, about halfway through construction or else at the end of construction. And I walk through the construction site with them and I say, tell me what we could have done better. Now, I'll tell you, the first couple times I went out there, they were like, they didn't want to tell me anything. They're like, no, we'll just deal with it in construction. Your phrase you hate. I got really frustrated with them, and when they'd give me just a little nugget, I went back and I fixed it for the next project, and they saw that I actually meant it. I now have my construction guys telling me and actually speaking up, but I had to be very proactive to go out and bring them in. And so that is, I think, something we need to do is go out and say, hey, guys, you have to build what we're designing. I really want your feedback. Because I think there was a long time prior to when I started working in this area, the attitude was they didn't want to bring construction in. At least that's what I was hearing from the construction office is, well, they don't care what we have to say. And so we had to convince them that we do care what they have to say. And I now have them sit on my teams, and they are actively involved in making decisions on how we move forward.
I appreciate Kelly saying that, because I do believe that we have kind of a new breed of resident engineer. The old school resident engineer mentality, of this is my kingdom and you'll only step into my kingdom with my permission type mentality. I don't believe that we have that anymore in our resident engineers. They really want to be team players. They are not know-it-alls. They are open to input, and they want to give input, and they want to hear from you, and they want you to hear them. So I think there's a real opportunity now with our new group of resident engineers. We have a lot of new resident engineers that really want to work together, because they know how important it is with what you do and how greatly that impacts what they do. And so if you've experienced resistance in the past, give it another shot with your new RE.
That goes for maintenance too. I pull them in and I have had to fight with them to get them to engage, but they suddenly are like, oh my gosh, now I understand why you do this, and they aren't as angry with us for some of what we do, but they've also made changes on the project so that we're actually creating things they can design instead of having us plant trees that they're going to mow over.
I've got a question for you, Chris. And maybe I'm not sure how many people have been affected by it, but it's the use and the provision of 3D design files from consultant design projects. And you and I have talked about this some, and are you seeing them handed off and work just fine? Are you seeing any other people provide conditional use of those files, or is there any movement in that area?
Dan, you are the only one. And I say that jokingly, but I have not seen that anywhere else yet. So
Good.
hopefully it stays there. Yeah.
Back here, I got a question. Just we went through so many things this week, and every one of them, some of them were just mentioned by name, and each one of those had 10 steps underneath that step, right? And I'm looking at the racetrack, and I'm running around it, and I might not be running one race. I have 7 projects going on all at the same time, and I'm in different points around that track. Do you guys have any recommendations of how do you keep it all straight in your head with all the other stuff going on too? Use TAMs, don't use tabs, PEBs do. You got a meeting about this thing tomorrow. How do you keep it all straight?
Do what works for you, because what works for me may not work for you. I very actively use my Outlook, and I put dates on my Outlook calendar that remind me that I have to do certain things on my project. I have one list that tells me all of my due dates. So at one point I had 9 projects. And I had a spreadsheet that showed all of the deliverable dates and what I had to do for each one. And then check your schedules and make sure you don't have overlapping dates. Because when I first started, I had DAPs that were a week apart. That was stupid. I didn't know when I scheduled it. I learned. So you need to really look at your schedules and make sure that you're not overloading yourself at any one time. But some people don't use Outlook the way that I would use Outlook, and what I do would confuse them. So that's what I'm saying. You have to find what works for you, but find a way to look at everything individually, but also look at it all together so that you're not overloading yourself at any one time.
Then we have time for one more question. Justin.
So 2 quick comments. In regards to what you were asking, I use OneNote. It can also connect in with the tasks and whatnot in Outlook. It can be very helpful depending on the person. And then just to reinforce what Chris was saying about getting out in the field, I spent close to a decade out in the field in construction inspection, both for consultant and other local agencies. Learning what the construction contractors are going to ask you about the project, about the specifications, about the plans, learning the types of things that they're going to ask and being able to actually respond to them in an intelligent manner, being able to provide them the direction that they need in the field without actually giving them direction to where you're being held liable. Taking the general inspection course for ODOT to actually learn what materials our inspectors are actually using in the field can be extremely helpful. I don't know how many of you actually use the MFTP, use the construction manual and other such documents. If you don't know what's in there, how are you developing a plan set and specs that are actually going to be usable for the inspectors and the construction team? So taking that class or spending some time in the field doing some of these activities would probably greatly help you in the understanding of how all this operates when in construction. I know it did for me.
Good thoughts. Thank you so much, Chris, Kelly, Justin. So appreciate your time.